Global power shifts how new trade alliances are quietly reshaping business in 2025. The rise of BRICS's African trade blocs and Asia-led supply chain alternatives. How these shifts could affect U.S. businesses relying on imports-exports, and where you can pivot your product sourcing or digital services. In the background of headlines about politics, inflation, and interest rates, there is a quieter revolution underway. One that could drastically reshape how global business is done in 2025 and beyond. Trade alliances are shifting. Old power centers are being challenged. And supply chains are being redesigned not just out of necessity, but out of strategy. If you are a business owner, especially one dealing in imports, exports, or digital services, these changes will affect you, whether you see them or not. The traditional dominance of Western-led trade frameworks is being questioned by the rise of coalitions like BRICS+, PAN, African trade blocs, and new Asia-centered logistics networks. These groups are not just signing symbolic agreements. They are creating real economic pathways, shifting the flow of resources, capital, and influence. While most of the business world focuses on short-term trends, these new alliances are quietly redrawing the global map, one trade route, one currency swap, and one infrastructure investment at a time. Let us start with BRICS+. Originally made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, this coalition has expanded both in influence and ambition. In 2025, it now includes nations such as Iran, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and Ethiopia. These countries collectively represent a massive share of global population and a growing share of global GDP. But more importantly, they are increasingly trading with each other in their own currencies, bypassing the US dollar altogether. That single shift has enormous implications for American businesses. If the Global South no longer needs to convert its transactions into dollars, demand for the dollar weakens. This can raise costs for US-based importers, especially those buying commodities like oil, grain, or metals. At the same time, BRICS+ nations are developing their own financial systems. Cross-border payment platforms and development banks are emerging as alternatives to SWIFT and the IMF. For a U.S. exporter who used to enjoy favored status, this means more competition, less leverage, and fewer guarantees. But BRICS+ is not the only player. Africa is also consolidating its trade landscape. The African Continental Free Trade Area, or AfCFTA, is one of the most ambitious projects in modern economic history. It aims to connect 54 African nations under a single trade framework, creating the largest free trade area in the world by number of countries. By reducing tariffs and simplifying customs procedures, African countries are starting to trade more with each other and less with Europe or North America. For entrepreneurs who rely on sourcing products from Africa or who aim to sell into African markets, this means two things. First, local competitors may grow stronger as regional trade becomes easier. Second, external businesses may face higher hurdles to entry, such as local content requirements, taxes, or licensing rules. But this shift is not just a threat, it is also an opportunity. Entrepreneurs who understand how to partner with African companies, invest in regional logistics, or offer services tailored to African consumers can position themselves for early success in a market that others are still underestimating. Meanwhile, Asia is quietly building the backbone of the next global supply chain. Led by China, regional players like Vietnam, Indonesia, and Malaysia are forming tight trade linkages through mechanisms like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. RCEP is the largest trade agreement in the world by GDP and population, and it focuses heavily on reducing non-tariff barriers, streamlining customs processes, and creating standards for digital trade. This is crucial because it represents the formalization of what has already been happening for years: the relocation of manufacturing power from China to its neighbors. As labor costs in China rise and tensions with the West escalate, businesses are moving production to Southeast Asia. This is not just about chasing cheap labor. It is about creating more resilient, diversified supply chains that are protected by trade agreements and supported by modern infrastructure. Now, here is the critical question for you as a business owner. Are you still sourcing from outdated channels, or are you positioning yourself inside these new trade corridors? Most small and medium businesses rely on long-standing suppliers from traditional hubs, but those hubs are being bypassed. If you are still importing from one major country without flexibility, you may find yourself paying more and receiving less. You need to ask yourself whether your current product sourcing strategy is built for the world as it was, or for the world as it is becoming. Here is where things get even more interesting. In the past, businesses would only rethink trade strategy when a crisis forced them to. A pandemic, a war, a shipping crisis, these events would expose weaknesses. But in 2025, it is not just about avoiding disaster. It is about seizing advantage. Businesses that proactively understand where the global flow of goods and services is moving will outpace those waiting for permission or guarantees. So what does pivoting look like? It means evaluating your suppliers not just for cost and quality, but for geopolitical alignment. If your supply chain depends heavily on a country facing sanctions, diplomatic isolation, or instability, then you are exposed. Instead, look toward emerging manufacturing centers that are benefiting from these new trade frameworks. Countries like Vietnam, Mexico, Turkey, and even parts of East Africa are rising in relevance. Mexico, for example, is becoming an essential part of the nearshoring movement for U.S. businesses. With new trade incentives under the USMCA and its geographic advantage, Mexico offers lower transportation costs and fewer regulatory headaches. For products that used to come from Asia, shifting to Mexican suppliers may now make both logistical and strategic sense. Vietnam, on the other hand, is integrating deeper into Asian supply networks, particularly those linked with Japan and South Korea. Its reputation for electronics and textile manufacturing has grown dramatically, and unlike China, Vietnam does not face the same level of scrutiny or tension from Western governments. That makes it a smart pivot for those looking to maintain access to both Eastern and Western markets. Another pivot worth considering is digital services. As trade alliances shift and physical supply chains become more politicized, digital services remain more agile. If you are a software developer, a consultant, or an agency owner, you are not bound by freight lanes or customs forms. But even digital service providers must now be aware of trade alliances. Some countries are offering tax breaks, talent visas, and IP protection as part of their trade strategies. Countries like Estonia, Singapore, and the United Arab Emirates are building ecosystems that attract digital-first entrepreneurs who want to serve clients globally while operating under favorable regulations. Let us not forget currency risk. As more countries reduce their dependency on the dollar, the playing field becomes more volatile for US-based companies. Accepting payments in euros, dirhams, or digital currencies might become less optional and more necessary. Those who adapt to multi-currency environments early will be better prepared for a future where the dollar is no longer the sole reference point. These are not science fiction predictions. These are real structural changes already happening across 2025. What was once seen as the center of the world is becoming just one of many centers. Power is decentralizing, and business models must decentralize with it. This does not mean the United States is in decline. Far from it. The US still holds massive advantages in technology, capital markets, and global influence. But it does mean that being based in the US is no longer enough to guarantee global competitiveness. Entrepreneurs must now learn to navigate a multipolar world where trade flows around you, not through you, unless you choose otherwise. Think about your own operation. Where do your supplies come from? Where are your customers located? What assumptions are you making about trade access, shipping timelines, and regulatory compliance? Are those assumptions still valid under these new alliances? Or are you building a business on outdated maps? You do not need a global logistics team or an MBA to take advantage of these shifts. What you need is awareness. You need to ask better questions about where growth is happening, who is doing the trading, and how you can position yourself closer to those emerging flows of commerce. Whether you sell physical goods or digital services, your success depends more than ever on understanding trade as a living, evolving system, not a static rulebook. If you found this breakdown helpful, the next video covers exactly how to restructure your supply chain in 2025 for resilience, speed, and scale without increasing your costs. because it is not about where the world used to trade. It is about where your next opportunity is already waiting.